What if I told you that a passing stranger, someone you'd never expect, could become the reason a struggling teacher, hanging by a thread, got a second chance at life? Today's story will take you deep into a rain-soaked city, into a crumbling school, and into the life of a woman who gave everything for her students, until her body couldn't keep up. But what happens when fate steps in, connecting her to a man with his own broken promises to heal? Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you love stories that touch your heart and remind you of the power of kindness, make sure to subscribe to Timeless Stories. These are the stories that deserve to be told, and you'll find them here every week. Now let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that morning, turning the cracked pavement outside Willowbrook Elementary into a maze of puddles. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and the faint metallic scent of leaking pipes. In room 104, Ms. Eleanor Price stood at the front of her class, her slender fingers gripping a piece of chalk so tightly they trembled. "Can anyone tell me how water turns into steam?" Her voice was soft, warm, but stretched thin, like a radio signal just barely reaching the station. In the second row, a small hand went up. Lucas Jennings, too thin for his years, his uniform a size too big. "Is it the sun, Ms. Price?" His voice was hesitant, unsure, like he was scared to get it wrong. Before she could reply, his stomach growled, loud enough for the whole class to hear. The other children pretended not to notice. They knew the sound well. Eleanor's heart clenched. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out half a peanut butter sandwich, her own lunch. She pressed it into Lucas's hands. He took it with both hands, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Ms. Price, you're all I've got." Outside, a dark sedan sat idling in the rain. Inside, a man named Adam Grayson watched through rain-streaked glass. His fingers were clenched around the steering wheel, breath caught in his throat like someone had punched him square in the chest. This wasn't about money or fame or even guilt. This was about a promise he'd made as a boy, one he'd buried so deep it almost didn't exist anymore. Almost. Adam wasn't supposed to be at Willowbrook that day, but life, in its cruel brilliance, has a way of pulling people into places they've spent years avoiding. When the rain forced him to pull over, he hadn't expected to see the ghost of his past. Not in the face of Ms. Eleanor Price. When he walked into the school's main office, rain dripping from his coat, the principal, Mrs. Davison, barely looked up. The exhaustion in her eyes was bone deep. "I need to know about Ms. Price," Adam said, his voice rough. "Eleanor Price." The mention of her name was enough to make Mrs. Davison's eyes soften, but also brim with worry. "She's this school's heart," she said softly, "and it's killing her. Every dollar she earns, she spends on these kids. She's their teacher, their counselor, their emergency meal ticket. But she's breaking, Mr. Grayson. Her body's failing her, and she won't stop." Adam stood frozen. The words hit like a hammer. A memory, long buried, surged forward. A flash of a sunlit lake, a boy's scream, water pulling them both down. A hand, stronger than it had any right to be, shoving him to the surface. "Eleanor," he whispered. His knees threatened to buckle. Back in room 104, Eleanor was losing her grip, literally and figuratively. The granola bar she slipped into Zoe Meyer's hand was her last. Zoe's brother was in the hospital and food at home was scarce. "You're stronger than this storm," Eleanor whispered. Then she turned to Malik, who'd lost his mother a month before. "You're enough," she told him, her voice cracking. "You're more than enough." But her strength, stretched thin across years of giving and giving, finally snapped. Her breath caught mid-sentence. A searing pain clutched her chest. Her knees buckled, her hands slamming against the chalkboard to brace herself. Chalk shattered against the floor, a soft echo of her body collapsing beside it. The kids screamed her name, their voices thin and panicked, their hands reaching to catch her, though they were far too small to hold her up. Adam was there in a heartbeat. He knelt beside her, rainwater still clinging to his coat, and cradled her head in his hands. "Stay with me," he begged. Her eyelids fluttered. "They're hungry," she whispered. "You're enough, Eleanor. You always were." At the hospital, Adam's assistant Sarah fed him the details. She's 36, started teaching right out of college, spends over half her salary on food and supplies for her kids. She's got no family. Her brother, David Price, drowned when he was 14, saving his best friend. Adam's breath caught. The hand that had saved him. David. And the girl and the little sister who'd clung to Adam at the funeral, her small hands trusting him to keep his promise to take care of her. Eleanor. The next day, Adam found her in her tiny apartment, her belongings stacked in boxes, an eviction notice taped to the door. She sat on the floor, clutching a worn photo of David, forever 14, grinning beside the lake. "I tried, David," she whispered. "I tried so hard." Adam knelt beside her. "Ellie," her head snapped up, eyes wide in disbelief. "Adam? David's Adam?" Tears pooled in her eyes. "You left us." "I never forgot," Adam choked out. I lost myself." Their sobs mingled with the rain beating against the window, decades of silence breaking apart in a flood neither could hold back. The next day, Adam stood at a press conference. The Eleanor Price Foundation, $5 million to ensure no teacher at Willowbrook or any school in the city ever has to starve themselves to feed their students. Eleanor stood beside him, frail but upright. Her students swarmed her, clinging to her hands, their faces alight with hope. "This is for you," Adam whispered, handing her a worn photograph. David's smiling face frozen in time. "David saved me, Ellie," Adam said, his voice trembling. "And you've been saving kids ever since. But now it's your turn." Tears slipped down her face. "You came back." "I promised him. I'm keeping it." Eleanor didn't just save her students. She taught them what love looks like when you have nothing left to give. And Adam? He learned that sometimes the only way to pay back a life-saving debt is to show up, broken and late, but willing to do the work. Kindness doesn't just lift the broken, it redeems the lost. Who's the teacher, the mentor, the hero who held you together when you were falling apart? Drop their name in the comments below so we can honor them together. And if this story stirred something in you, hit like and subscribe to Timeless Stories. Let's flood the world with the kind of love that turns promises into legacies.